Founder Suge Knight had a lot to say about the Tupac Shakur murder trial during a jailhouse interview with TMZ. Knight was in the car with Tupac the night he was shot on the Strip in September of 1996.
A 61-year-old man is sitting in a prison cell outside San Diego right now. And the words he said last week from behind those walls have rattled a courtroom 400 miles away. For 30 years, he barely spoke about the night his best friend bled out beside him. Now, with a murder trial finally underway in Las Vegas, he has broken his silence, not to confess, not to cooperate, but to issue a warning that everyone connected to this case is taking very seriously. His name is Suge Knight, and he is the only person alive who was actually inside the car when Tupac Shakur was shot. Knight has nothing left to bargain with. He is serving a 28-year sentence at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility for running over and killing a man named Terry Carter during an altercation in a Compton parking lot back in 2015. Given his age and the length of his sentence, there is a real chance he never walks out of prison a free man. He has no plea deal to protect, no reputation left to rebuild, and by his own account, nothing to gain from talking. And yet, in the days after jury selection began for the trial of Dwayne Davis, the man accused of orchestrating Tupac's murder, Knight picked up a prison phone and gave an interview to ABC News that instantly became the most talked about moment of the entire case. "This trial has nothing to do with me," Knight told the network, "and if somebody brings me there, it's gonna hurt whoever brings me there." He didn't stop there. He made clear that being forced to testify, whether by the defense or by the prosecution, would not go well for either side. It wasn't a statement of a man preparing to help solve a 30-year-old murder. It was a statement of a man drawing a line in the sand and daring anyone to cross it. But refusing to testify didn't mean Knight had nothing left to say. Just a day after that ABC interview aired, he dialed into TMZ Live from prison and went further than he ever had before. He told the hosts flatly that what happened to Tupac wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a gang beef that spiraled out of control. It was, in his words, an assassination. He dismissed the version of a story that most people have believed for 30 years, the idea that Tupac was killed as payback for a stolen chain, a flare-up over gang colors, or the fight in the MGM lobby earlier that night. As far as Knight is concerned, that explanation was always too small for what actually happened. He went further still, claiming that Dwayne Davis was nowhere near the only person responsible, that other individuals played a role in planning and carrying out the killing. Though true to form, he refused to name a single one of them. He also pushed back on 3 decades of suspicion aimed squarely at him, pointing out that he took a bullet close enough to his own skull to nearly kill him, and that the people who spent years insisting he was somehow behind his best friend's murder had it completely backwards. It was, by his own account, a version of the truth he had been sitting on for 30 years, offered up not as a confession, but as a correction to a story he believes the public has always gotten wrong. To understand why those words carry so much weight, you have to understand exactly who Suge Knight is in this story. He isn't a witness who heard something secondhand or read about the case in a book. He was behind the wheel of the BMW when 13 shots tore into the passenger side. He felt the impact as bullets struck the car inches from his own head, close enough that fragments reportedly grazed his scalp. He watched Tupac get hit multiple times, made a frantic turn on tires that had just been shredded by gunfire, and drove toward the hospital with a dying man beside him. For 3 decades, through police questioning, grand jury proceedings, documentaries, and now an actual murder trial, he has never told the world what he saw in that Cadillac before the shots were fired. Not because his memory has failed him, because in his world, testifying is treated as a greater sin than the murder itself. He said as much in that same interview, comparing the act of testifying to something worse than pulling a trigger. In his view, a person who is shot dies once. A person who is exposed by testimony, he suggested, is made to suffer that death over and over every time the story gets told. It's a brutal, uncompromising code, and whether you find it admirable or infuriating, it explains exactly why Knight has stayed silent for 30 years and why he intends to keep doing so, subpoena or not. But while Knight refuses to name Tupac's actual shooter, he has never been shy about pointing a finger at someone else entirely, someone far more powerful than any Compton gang member, and a name that keeps resurfacing every time this case makes headlines. To get there, we have to go back to the night everything went wrong. September 7, 1996, was supposed to be one of the biggest nights of the year in Las Vegas. Mike Tyson was fighting Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand, and the fight drew an enormous crowd from the worlds of music, entertainment, and the street. Tupac and Suge Knight had ringside seats. Tyson finished Seldon off in the very first round, and as the crowd spilled out of the arena and into the MGM's packed lobby, something happened that would set the rest of the night in motion. A death row associate spotted a young man he recognized from a previous incident, a 21-year-old named Orlando Anderson, who went by Baby Lane and ran with the Southside Compton Crips. Months earlier, Anderson and a group of Crips had allegedly jumped a death row associate at a shopping mall in Los Angeles and taken his gold chain, a piece of jewelry that carried real significance within the label's inner circle. To death row, that theft wasn't just a robbery. It was a challenge, and a public one. When Tupac was pointed toward Anderson in that MGM lobby, he didn't hesitate. He crossed the room and threw the first punch, and within seconds Knight and several others joined in. The brawl was caught on the hotel's security cameras, and that footage would later be replayed constantly across national news. What gets lost in most retellings is what happened inside Tupac's head immediately afterward. According to Knight, Tupac was terrified that the footage of the beating could be used to send him back to prison. He had only been out for less than a year, released on bail that Knight himself had posted while Tupac appealed a prior conviction he always maintained was unjust. Knight has said that Tupac was consumed by the fear of losing his freedom again, and that he made a promise that night that has taken on an eerie, tragic weight in hindsight, that he would rather die than go back behind bars. From the MGM, the group returned briefly to the Luxor, where Tupac changed clothes, and then they set out for Club 662 on East Flamingo Road, a venue Knight owned, where Tupac was expected to make an appearance. A convoy of death row vehicles trailed the BMW. Tupac reportedly rode partway with his upper body out of the sunroof, waving to fans who chased the car through the strip. For a few minutes, it looked like the chaos from the fight had already been left behind them. Then, at a red light at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, a white Cadillac pulled up beside them. What happened in the next several seconds changed the course of hip-hop history and left a case that would remain officially unsolved for nearly 3 decades. The men in that Cadillac didn't arrive at that intersection by coincidence, and untangling how they got there means following a trail of grudges, money, and one man who, for reasons nobody could have predicted, simply could not stop talking about what he did. Most cold cases eventually break open because of physical evidence. A fingerprint, a DNA match, a camera angle investigators missed the first time. Tupac's murder had almost none of that. No murder weapon was ever recovered. The Cadillac itself vanished and was never found. Orlando Anderson, long considered the most likely shooter, was killed in an unrelated gang shooting in Compton in 1998 at just 23 years old, taking whatever he knew to his grave. For years, it seemed like this case would stay exactly where it had always been, full of suspicion, empty of proof. What changed everything wasn't a breakthrough by investigators. It was Dwayne "Dwayne" Davis, Anderson's own uncle and a former high-ranking figure in the Southside Compton Crips, who spent roughly 2 decades essentially confessing to his own involvement in public, over and over, across nearly every media platform available to him. He gave interviews to police. He appeared in documentaries and true crime specials on multiple networks. In one docuseries he described, in specific and disturbing detail, where inside the Cadillac the fatal shots had come from. Then, in 2019, he released a memoir with a subtitle that all but dared prosecutors to come after him, branding himself the last living eyewitness willing to tell the real story. In that book, he wrote about acquiring the weapon used in the shooting, riding in the Cadillac that night, and even described the specific outfit he was wearing. Investigators later turned up a photograph of him in that exact clothing. For years, none of it seemed to matter, because Nevada authorities weren't pursuing charges. Davis appeared to believe he was permanently protected, that decades of talking without consequence meant he'd never actually be held accountable. He was wrong. In late September 2023, police arrested him at his home in Henderson, Nevada, ending a quiet retirement built around golf games and time with his grandchildren. He argued that a much older immunity agreement made years earlier in connection with a federal investigation into the murder of Biggie Smalls should have shielded him from prosecution. A judge disagreed, ruling that agreement never applied to Nevada's case against him. Today, Davis sits in a Las Vegas jail charged with murder, having pleaded not guilty and rejected a plea deal. His defense strategy is, by any measure, an audacious one. He is now arguing that he wasn't even in Las Vegas the night Tupac was killed. That claim runs directly into hotel records, showing a room booked under his wife's name at one hotel that night, and another room booked under Orlando Anderson's name at a different property nearby. But the piece of evidence that may do the most damage to his case wasn't dug up by detectives at all. It came from Davis himself, in a recorded phone call he made from jail just days after his arrest. Every person held in a county jail is told, repeatedly, that their calls are recorded. There are signs by the phones. There's an automated warning before every single call connects. Despite all of that, Davis picked up the phone in the days following his arrest and called a woman close to him. When she brought up his memoir, his response was immediate and unguarded, a simple, direct acknowledgement that he had, in fact, written it. That short exchange undid the foundation of an entire legal strategy. For months, Davis and his attorneys had argued that his memoir was essentially fiction, ghostwritten by his co-author and published without Davis ever having genuinely reviewed its contents. In an earlier jailhouse interview, Davis insisted he had never even read his own book, claiming he simply handed over stories from his life and let someone else shape them into a manuscript. The recorded jail call told a very different story. The presiding judge ultimately ruled the memoir admissible, noting that Davis had repeatedly and publicly described its contents as the real truth. Prosecutors are expected to play that recording for the jury during a trial anticipated to run for roughly a month. Even Knight, watching from prison, has weighed in on how badly that defense is likely to land with the jury, comparing Davis's legal strategy to someone falling off a cliff and grabbing at anything within reach, twigs and flowers that were never going to hold his weight in the first place. And that brings us to the name Suge Knight keeps circling back to, the one that has shadowed this case since long before Davis was ever arrested. During an earlier proffer session with federal investigators, Davis alleged that music mogul Sean Diddy Combs had offered a substantial cash bounty for harm to come to both Tupac and Suge Knight, a claim that has since surfaced repeatedly in court filings and law enforcement documents connected to the case. Combs has consistently and firmly denied any involvement whatsoever, and Las Vegas police have stated clearly that he has never been named a suspect or formally charged in connection with Tupac's death. None of that has stopped the allegation from resurfacing again and again, largely fueled by Knight himself, who has spent years telling anyone who would listen that the true story behind the shooting traces back to money, not gang rivalry. Knight has pointed directly at Combs in multiple interviews over the years, alleging deeper knowledge of the killing than has ever been made public, and insisting that people within the music industry have long known more than they've said. That allegation has never been proven in a court of law, and it remains exactly that, an allegation, repeated by a man with every incentive in the world to shift blame away from his own inner circle. But it has never gone away either, and it hovers over this trial the way it has hovered over the entire case since 1996. What makes Suge Knight's position in all of this so difficult to untangle is that his refusal to testify isn't really about self-preservation anymore. He has nothing left to protect. It's about a code, one rooted in the neighborhoods where he grew up, where cooperating with law enforcement has always been treated as one of the deepest betrayals a person can commit, regardless of what justice might actually require. In his ABC interview, Knight described an almost impossible internal contradiction, a loyalty to Tupac that he says can never be compromised, paired with a refusal to do the one thing, testify, that could actually help deliver some form of accountability for his friend's death. He has said, in effect, that he isn't there to help Davis, and he isn't there to hurt him either. He simply refuses to participate in the machinery of the court at all. At the same time, Knight has made his opinion of Davis unmistakably clear without ever setting foot in a witness box. He's pointed out repeatedly that Davis spent 2 decades talking about his role in the murder before the case ever reached a courtroom. Interviews, documentaries, a memoir, a jailhouse phone call. And that, in Knight's words, Davis effectively convicted himself with his own mouth long before any trial began. That's really what makes this case so unusual. Prosecutors have no murder weapon. The Cadillac was never recovered. Orlando Anderson, the man many believe pulled the trigger, has been dead for over 25 years. And the only surviving eyewitness who was actually inside the car has made it abundantly clear he will not help build the state's case, no matter how many times he's subpoenaed. What the prosecution does have is a defendant who spent the better part of 2 decades describing, in vivid and specific detail, exactly what he did, before turning around in court and insisting that all of it was invention, built for book sales and television appearances. Whether a jury believes that a man would fabricate that level of detail about his own alleged role in one of the most famous unsolved murders in American history, for money over and over for 20 years, that's the question this trial ultimately comes down to. Suge Knight closed out his interview with ABC not by talking about Tupac's murder, but by talking about his youngest son, a teenager who plays basketball and writes his own music. Knight said his son's favorite rapper is Tupac, and that his son's friends feel exactly the same way, an entire new generation still drawn to an artist who's been gone for 30 years. Knight said that even though Tupac isn't physically here anymore, he's still present in a different way, in the minds of the people who remember him, and in the hearts of everyone who ever really knew him. So here's where that leaves us. A man who was closer to Tupac Shakur's murder than anyone alive is refusing one more time to say the one thing that might finally close this case, while pointing, without hesitation, at someone else entirely. A defendant is preparing to argue in court that decades of his own public confessions were nothing but performance. And a name that has followed this story since 1996 continues to surface in courtrooms, documents, and interviews, without ever being formally tied to what happened that night. What do you think really happened at that intersection in 1996? Do you believe Suge Knight is protecting the truth or protecting himself? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what you think.